And somebody want to remind me where I left off? Whose value are you measuring? Did we talk about that? Oh, well, we'll start over there. Whose value? When you set up a survey, you have to think about who you're going to send the survey to, how you're going to ask the question, and who are you going to ask. When you ask different people, you're going to get different answers. So think about this in terms of the answer. What answer do you want? What are you trying to value? Ultimately, we are trying to establish some sort of demand curve and find out what the total value is or the marginal value along that curve. Okay? So that's the point of this. So whose value? Who are the people in that market? Who are the people who are willing to pay for this type of good or service? Well, sorry, it's all buttered up there with the cord. A few times I have to drink a coffee. Adding to my shakiness. Okay. What else do I have to say about this? What else can we think about in terms of whose value? Think about bequest value. Think about option value. Those sort of have future, the connotation of measuring value in the future. If we're thinking about value, are we also thinking about future generations? So if we measure these values and we get a certain total value or consumer surplus right now, does this reflect what values might be in the future? Not necessarily. So if you're reading a study of a CVM done 5 years ago, does that value still hold today? So if you're reading these things and evaluating them, you also have to think about whose value in terms of time. So not just time, or not just geography, but time. Okay? Does it make sense? Because values change over time. Okay. So in terms of whose value, you have to think about the population. Who are you going to sample in the population? Is it going to be all users, for example, or non-users? Let's say we're valuing the dog park. Do we ask the people who ride their bikes through there, as well as walk with and without dogs, or do you just ask dog people? It's probably going to be different. So what is it we're trying to measure? And think about the value. If we're talking about estimating the value to come up with maybe some revenue, then you might want to ask all taxpayers. If you're asking a question to maybe determine what a fee would be, say to use a park or something, then you might ask the people who actually use it, because they're the ones who are going to be paying that amount of money, right? They'll pay the price, the marginal value. So these things sort of have to go together. And you have to think about this up front when you formulate the questions in the survey. You guys get surveys online and look at them sometimes and think, well, what is it are they trying to figure out? And who else might they be asking? And then, does the survey make sense? Okay, data collection. How might you be able to collect the data? How can you collect data?
Just kind of like survey or something like that.
What? A survey? Yeah, what kind of
Or
survey?
just already databases.
Okay. You can look at a database if you're looking at prices and stuff like that. How might you set up your survey? This is an easy question. It's not a trick question.
You just determine the market and then the group that will kind of...
That's kind of the who, right? Just determining the population. In terms of data collection, are you going to phone them?
Oh, you mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Are you
just
going to
meet them?
send mail? Is it going to be a face-to-face interview? Is it going to be internet?
Like chatting, you mean?
What's that?
Internet like chatting, you mean?
No, like an internet survey, SurveyMonkey, right?
Then it will just put your survey on the website
Yeah.
and then we'll just...
You invite people to do surveys by internet. How do you think you would choose one or the other? What do you think?
Those interviews.
According to the number of group, or how big?
Yep. You think about, when you're talking about whose value, how many people are you going to ask?
And
If you're
just
gonna-
choose that group of people that will kind of reflect all the, how to say, opinion of the whole population, right?
Yeah, you want to select,
Yeah.
you want to sample properly from the population to reflect your results. But if you're asking a lot of people, which do you think is best here?
Yes, if
Do you have to interview 10,000
No,
people?
no, just interview.
If you're doing, just remember this, if you go and do a master's and you're going to do a survey and you want to interview face to face, don't go with 10,000 people, you'll never graduate. Okay?
You might want to worry about demographic too, right?
Yep. That comes into the whose value, demographics. Are you capturing the right people? And that goes back to, why are you doing the survey? What do you want to know? Are you advising policymakers about prices? Are you advising managers about charging fees? Are you advising policy about taxes, how we should spend our taxes? Those things determine who you ask and how you ask them. And that's why it's so easy to screw the whole thing up. Because if you don't know what you're doing at the outset, you wind up with a survey that doesn't give you the answers that you want. And you find that out after you've mailed the survey and you've spent all the money, you get it and you think, crap, that's not what I expected. And then you realize, oh, they interpreted my question wrong. So data collection is going to depend on whose value. It also depends on this. How much money do you have to spend? These things are usually funded, or they're always funded by somebody or other, and they have budgets. We did a survey in the States that was probably over $100,000 because we used the interview method. And it was $100 an interview, and you have to start by putting all this stuff together, selecting the population, getting their phone numbers, and you have to pay for information. And then we had to have somebody sit down and interview each household. They had to call them, get them to agree to an interview, and then sit down for an hour-long interview in both Spanish and French, or Spanish and English, I think. So it's not cheap to do that. You get different information from each of these types of surveys. So when you think about data collection, you think of how much money do you have to spend, and then the mode of collecting, right? Sending out a mail survey, we did one of those as well. You have the piece of paper, you gotta shove it in an envelope, send it off with a postage paid return, then people throw them in the garbage, or they peel off the stamp and use it for something else, and then you have to send them another one. And so it's really expensive.
Will also go, yeah, to garbage.
Time
Yeah.
consuming, yeah. I mean, you get interviews or you get surveys in the mail, garbage, recycling, whatever. Phone interviews, the banks, what's with the banks? I bank at TD, and these people want to know my opinion every day, every single transaction. Why is TD calling? Sorry, she's not available. So phone, you get a lot of hang-ups. These are all, they all add all to the expenses and the quality of the data. Internet surveys, cheap, right? You can send them out, but are you getting the right people to fill in the survey? So there's aspects of all of them that you have to question. Okay. So, any questions about this? Okay. D, sample size. How many people do you have to interview to make it valid? This kind of depends on, going right back to the first thing, what kind of question are you asking and what kind of information do you want? If the sample size, if you want to know what the national opinion is of something, well, you're going to have to sample across the country. if you want to know something for the city of Saskatoon, then you look at the population and determine the sample size statistically for this population. So it depends on the population. And sometimes on the type of data collection you're doing, okay? And there's different kinds of surveys where they're not necessarily random, but they're rolled into like a snowball survey. You ask somebody and you say, do you know anybody else who knows a lot about this topic? And they say, yeah, these 3 people. So then you go and ask those 3 people. So it's sort of an exploratory approach, but it targets the people who have all the knowledge. So there's many ways of doing it, and you have to understand what those ways are, and basically you have to understand statistics. Okay. Another thing with the sample size is response rate. How many people are going to say no? They're not going to do your survey. So if you have a database of 1,000 names and only 2% say yes, is that going to result in enough finished surveys to give you a valid estimate of what the value is? Okay? So you got to think of the response rate. Could you see response rate being different for these? They're probably going to be different. Telephone these days is really difficult. Specific interviews, depending on the population. But the response rate is going to, all this stuff sort of fits together.